Great. Welcome back. I'm going to introduce our next session, which is something that runs through all of these operational real estate aspects, and that's hospitality. This will deep dive around the next era for the hospitality industry with a focus on the evolution of hospitality into a multi-service. We've got an excellent panel and moderator with us. So we've got Wayne Godwin, Senior Vice President, JLL Hotels and Hospitality Group. And he'll be in discussion with Mark Waxberger, Managing Director, the Capital Hotel Group, and Paul Mack, Group Executive Director, Latitude Hotels Group. Wayne, welcome. Mark, welcome. I think Paul is just logging on, so we can get started. And then as soon as he joins in, he'll just come in. But Wayne, I'll hand it over to you, and looking forward to the session.
Great. Thank you very much, Kafir, and welcome, Mark. And while we wait for Paul, good to get started. Yes, so today is very much around operational real estate as a service, and the happenings that we're seeing in the industry. I think hotels are probably one of the oldest operational real estate segments, and has a long story around that. And I think as alternatives become a more important and critical asset class, a lot look to hotels as a sort of benchmark and best practice for the broader operational real estate. So good to have Mark Waxberger join us as Managing Director of Capital Hotel Group, and I think Paul Mack will be joining quite shortly. My name is Wayne Godwin. I'm a Senior Vice President of JLL Hotels and Hospitality in Middle East and Africa, with really a focus on Sub-Saharan Africa. And we've got a couple slides here today, which I think we'll dive into whilst we wait for Paul to join. And it's a little bit different from normal. I think normally we do a bit more on the market and the investment case and what we're seeing from a capital flow point of view, whereas today we're going to be looking at, what are some of the trends impacting hospitality and hotels that ultimately impacts investors. So just a little bit, I think it's you can't ignore the situation we find ourselves with COVID-19 having frankly decimated the sector and global travel. So you can see a significant drop from previous levels. And really the story now shifts to what is the rebound look like. We know the fundamentals were very good. I think a lot of people look to the last block and 2020 and see a very negative story, but there's also an incredibly positive story from an international travel perspective over the last 2 decades. And that's really come about from growth in population, growth in particularly the middle class in Asia, and hotels and hospitality has been a big benefactor, and we've seen that in terms of capital flowing into the sector. So just to kind of, give a bit of perspective on Sub-Saharan Africa, you can really get a sense of how small the sector is in compared to some of the bigger regions. And I guess this is both an opportunity and a challenge for the sector. So, where new, particularly with regards to performance and new supply coming into these markets, still very thin and prone to oversupply. But of course, there's a big opportunity here, particularly when you look at these metrics relative to the GDP in most across Africa, population growth, etc., and take a longer term view of the sector. It's very difficult to then have a negative view on hotels and hospitality as an asset class in Africa. And of course, that's why we do what we do. Just onto some of the trends. So these are sort of let's say, our house view or global view on what we're seeing. We're certainly seeing a rise in, let's say, more flexible agreements with operators, and I think the franchise is one that clearly is particularly popular at the moment. Why? Well, we've seen the need for more flexibility. We've seen the rise in white label operators look and being able to bring more flexibility to owners with hybrid structures, no longer just owned or leases. We've shifted down that curve into more management agreements, asset light, franchises, and franchises that sort of combine both of these. So the technical bits is not as relevant as to the trend around more flexibility coming in, which ultimately benefits owners. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
Hey, Wayne. Yeah, good to see you. Hey, Mark. Apologies.
No problem.
Technology was thwarting us today.
No problem. I was just running through a quick presentation just to set the scene a bit for the discussion, and we'll keep going. I think a big trend that we're seeing is certainly reconfiguration of hotel space and design. Some of this was COVID, but a lot of this was the momentum the sector had from Airbnb and even Airbnb IPO and looking for more residential style accommodation. Average lengths of stay have been increasing, and the big factor also is incorporating more technology into the guest experience. Some of that is now more from a contactless perspective and COVID and safety and hygiene, which will inevitably last. But a lot of that was a trend that we were seeing anyway, and a lot more technology integrated into hospitality. But yeah, I think major brands all looking at residential components, looking to how they can make their product a bit more, aligned to this. And then I think this is a direct COVID trend, and what we've seen, and particularly in Europe, a rise in investment into open air hospitality. So open air hospitality is a little bit of a broad term. Essentially, it talks to more, your hospitality product that is not in a single structure, so a typical hotel. So something we're quite familiar with in South Africa through a lot of our lodges and resorts, etc., are orientated this way. But it's largely driven by this domestic staycation and domestic demand through people not being able to travel due to lockdowns and restrictions. And we do see a lot of this staying and people shifting towards more short, more regular breaks rather than that once every 3-4 years taking that long extended overseas holiday necessarily. So I think overall we see it as broadly positive and shifting of capital into establishments that can actually capture this and attract that market. And then a big one, which is not just a hospitality let's say trend, but a broader real estate trend that's particularly apparent in hospitality, is this blurring of lines between real estate. And this is probably one of the bigger things we'll talk to today. And I'm sure many of the other panelists have discussed it within their respective sessions, because it's the incorporation of all these different service real estate functions into one and into hospitality. So we've seen a number of hotel groups really focus on this and invest in this space, whether it's co-working. We know co-working works incredibly well in a hospitality space, and that live work play mentality is not so much a mixed use function in a mixed use development, but a function within the hotel itself. So yeah, that's a big one, and we'll focus on that a bit today. And then certainly sustainability, and I think it's something that has been on the radar for a long time, but not necessarily gotten the attention it's deserved. And I'll be the first to admit not really, I think, understanding the importance and the impact that real estate is having on the broader environment, and how important it is for travelers to switch their choices. There's a whole global movement arising around the reluctance to travel and travel responsibly, and really, I think, where ESG is becoming a critical component for any institutional investor looking to deploy capital. We've debated this a lot as JLL, and we really kind of feel that this is a huge opportunity for Africa because of the social side of it. It's not just the environmental and governance aspect. We've got an opportunity. We work in a sector, and particularly hospitality, which creates a lot of jobs and employment opportunities. And for a long time, it is a sector that is hugely pro-poor and developmental, and that is going to become, let's say, a strong attribute when it comes to attracting capital into the sector. So that's definitely something to watch out for. And I think this kind of gives a bit more detail, which it came as a bit of a surprise around the extent to which, let's say, how intensive hotels are from an energy and water point of view. You can see them as the most intensive when it comes to a sort of footprint, and there's a lot of focus now on this, and how do we correct this as an industry, and where can we adapt our products to become more responsible, and with that, reap the benefits. I think that's the key thing. So that kind of gives a little bit just on the broad trends that we're seeing, and really the point of today is a bit of a debate and discussion with my colleagues to get their perspective, because really there's two gentlemen have been very disruptive in their careers and positioning their products and businesses. So when it comes to a service, the two best to speak to. So I think what Mark and Paul, from as two entrepreneurs that sort of came into the sector, rather than people that had grown up in the sector and kind of carved their entire career in the sector, why don't you give us a bit about how that happened and how you saw the opportunity and where your businesses are today? Mark, do you want to maybe go first?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So the Capital Hotels and Apartments of South Africa is a business that I founded in 2008 after having been in the mergers and acquisitions environment. So I'm an outsider from the hospitality sector and call it more of a numbers guy. And, what was obvious to me is that this was a sector that was continuing in very old norms, and that there was an opportunity for disruption. The start of disruption was a question of why are hotel rooms so expensive compared to residential, and so we started leasing apartments and subletting them nightly, which, as we know, years later has effectively become where Airbnb has stepped in, and there's almost call it a extended stay apartment product, which is still true to where we're at. We're a hotel, apartment, and conference operator today that has 12 hotels. But that original route of disruption and entrepreneurship and an outsider approach to the hotel sector is something that's still core to our values today. So we are highly acquisitive with our M&A genes, and we are and we're growing, and we're converting and repurposing hotels as we speak.
Great. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Wayne, and good afternoon, everyone. It's as ever a pleasure, albeit remotely, to catch up with so many like-minded people. As Wayne said, very much like Mark, I'm an outsider, ex-investment banker. So, Latitude is put together pretty well by people who started off knowing nothing about hospitality, but very much a lot about what we felt as users of hospitality in Sub-Saharan Africa would really be looking for. And frankly, this was, I wouldn't say we put the group together out of necessity, but it was out of choice for the type of look and feel and footprint and format of properties that we would like ourselves to stay at. And picking up on your earlier point, Wayne, I think the whole issue of the post-COVID, the work, stay, play concept and the co-working and the merging of a number of what would otherwise have historically been discrete touch points, and these converging has certainly been a trend that we've seen. And as you may be aware, and I saw on your slide you had our logo, we made a deliberate effort to incorporate not business centers but discrete proper modular co-working space, whether you want to have perching on a bench, or if you wanted a small pod, or frankly if you wanted a 3-suite office for 3, 4, 5 months, that would be available. And certainly in the post-COVID world, as we continue to recover in Sub-Saharan, we've seen an increasing trend of people wishing to incorporate an element of long stay, co-working, and using our overall platform as their base HQ. And we've actually seen corporates tear up leases downtown in Lusaka and actually just move in, because not only is it convenient from their perspective, but the perception of these being more controllable, low density, quote, safe, unquote, environments from a hygiene, from a safety and COVID protocol perspective, as opposed to mainstream work environments, that perception is definitely there as well. So we're seeing some interesting themes that are playing out at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think that certainly has been something that we've often cited when it's reference to some of the big global brands that have moved into the space and being quite innovative, to say actually here's a great case study of a local operator who's really kind of made this a big focus of their business. So I think that's important, and the product is quite critical to how we get out of COVID and what are the changes that are made. Mark, I think from your side also been quite a disruptive product over the years, whether it's small things such as the interleading door modules and how you kind of configure, and clearly the product has changed a lot over the years with some of the new builds, etc. What has been your sort of philosophy to what you've brought in from a product, and how's it sort of differentiated you over the last decade?
Okay, so as I said to you, apartments was our cornerstone of where we started. And then just through an opportunity to acquire distressed hotels or products in oversupplied environments, became who we are today. The first was in the hang-up of 2010 World Cup in South Africa. There was a building that happened to have hotel rooms and apartments, where we put in an interleading door system and broke 2-bedroom apartments up into the second bedroom being a separately sold hotel room to the 1-bedroom apartment. And that was the start of what we see as flexibility that we continued with the approach, because what we'd find is that you would have, just call it a group of colleagues working, coming to consult in South Africa around a 2 or 3 week project, wanting to work together in the evening. When you talk about workplace stay, they collaborate around the dining room table, and then they each go to their bedrooms. So you've got a 2-bedroom apartment, both being utilized. And then, the next day you have a conference where it's all about price and they just want a standard hotel room and you've separately rented the 1-bedroom apartment. So it's key in our thinking that flexibility is really, really important. When you take that into a COVID environment where we're at today, that flexibility is what has saved us through COVID, where we actually managed to break even through the whole of COVID, through, amongst other things, renting out our hotel and apartment stock into the residential sector. So we could pivot from hotel to residential immediately. Why? Because we're flexible. And then also just listening to what our clients like, because as we've grown into other hotel properties, for example, the Capital on the Park in Sandton, where we've mixed residential with apartments and hotel and conferencing, we're seeing a big synergy of residents liking to live inside a hotel and utilize and sharing the cost of hotel facilities. And where we're at today, where we've just undertaken an acquisition of Zimbali Hotel on the KZN coast of South Africa. There we're finding, again, the opportunity to mix in, like Paul's saying, working spaces where people are going to work inside of our hotels and co-working opportunities in our properties, so that everything is and one project to the next is not the same, because it depends which market we're in, and we have to have that flexibility ourselves as well.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And you mentioned Zimbali, and I think, having started in 2008 and gone through that GFC and kind of seeing the opportunities that came out of that, now you've had recently announcement of 3 new additions, sort of seeing a trend here, and clearly from a, let's say, a distress perspective, and when you've been able to see opportunities, has that sort of been something conscious, or something that you've just kind of found yourself in a space being able to be agile enough to make decisions quicker than maybe some other players, or what is kind of is there merits in that?
I'd be interested to hear from Paul as well, but we're both investment bankers.
Yeah.
And so, there's an approach and a mindset that I was raised with, which is,
Mark, that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person, just for the record.
I was going to
it's not an accident. Yeah, together, I thought it would be a nice mix.
So we're brought up with risk as our mindset, and funding of hotel projects is all about risk. You can raise the funding if you can de-risk the projects. And so we had de-risked our business to some extent and prepared ourselves for, we didn't think it would be a COVID, we didn't think it would be as harsh as it's been, but call it for a heavily negative economic scenario, because we think the world had run quite hot. So we had readied ourselves that the best way to grow is in those oversupplied environments, like post the 2010 World Cup, and like what we're seeing now. And so we have positioned ourselves to be now ready for these acquisitions that we're undertaking. And we think it's just going to get started now, because the amount of distressed properties that are going to come on the market that are going to need to be repurposed is significant. And then if you look at the hotel sector, our competitors have been management companies, which you put on your schedule earlier. And I think that the management companies have relied on investors. They're just a management company on behalf of a property or hotel owner and investor. And they just haven't had that ability to pivot and change quickly, because there's bureaucracy in that approach. I guess Paul as well, we're owner-operator approaches that do better in a rough and ragged environment.
Yeah, and I think your point there is very well taken, and it is going slightly off piece from the core conversation we're having. But the delineation between the owner operator and potentially a franchise and/or a management company, I think is an important point, especially during the times of COVID, when, as you say, if you are dealing with a major and you've got an HMA in place, it could well be quite tricky to turn that super tank around in a fairly short period of time in terms of either repurposing or repositioning your properties. We are, very much the unusual, kids on the block that, we are owners, operators. We have the land, we have the walls, we have the operating company, we have the management company, we have the flag. So, I mean, we are the fully enclosed Apple ecosystem, which, is a double-edged, can be potentially a double-edged sword. But what it does allow us to do is move very quickly in terms of, repositioning and in terms of decision making for how we wish to react to exogenous events, but also in terms of how we want to position the business going forward. And whether it's worked out as luck or clairvoyance, the smaller, low density boutique footprint is one that resonates well at the moment with business travelers and the middle class from an F&B and leisure perspective alike, as opposed to the higher density, large key offerings. So again, we're very happy to continue to be operating in this space, and our strategic plan at the moment is we're looking to roll out further ones of these across Sub-Saharan on exactly the basis you say, Mark.
Good. Yeah, I think that's critical, and maybe just for the audience benefits. I mean, I think the Latitude model very much kind of more boutique with the co-working space, and then members club as well, right, Paul? So not just the co-working and almost kind of linking various hotels with each other for the Pan-African regional traveler who's hopping from core city, gateway city to gateway city, right?
For sure. And I'm not quite sure if this will actually work in terms of my screen share, but I will endeavor to just share a quick screen with you, just so
maybe while you adding that up. I mean, Mark, we sort of touched on it a little bit there around what it gives you from a ability to raise capital, and I think there's clearly also a portfolio play in being able to roll out and have scale versus a single investor into a managed hotel as well. I mean, how is the sort of flexibility in your approach assisted on raising capital? I mean, clearly you've got the residential model as well, but some other innovative sort of approaches that you've taken over the years in terms of funding without disclosing too much clearly?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share. I think what's worked well for us is that because we're apartment hotel operators, and when I say that, I've spoken about apartment plus a hotel room, making a 2-bedroom apartment, that as a sectional title element has become a fundable item. There's standard banking funding in South Africa that appreciates that I can fund a 2-bedroom apartment more than I can fund a hotel room, because banks have found that, if there isn't that second use or that flexibility that I spoke about for a hotel room, then they generally take a very conservative approach to funding. And if you follow more of the residential model, then I know I can get much higher loan to values or loans to costs, where it's residential and it's got that second purpose. But taking it a step further, we brought in investors who are in the buy-to-let residential market, and we said, you can actually get 90% gearing if you, as an individual, buy one of these 2-bedroom apartments and then lease it to us, fixed lease it to us. We generally do 3-year leases, renewable up to 9 years. And so what's landed up happening is they get a good cost of capital. They pass on that good cost of capital to us, and we then have a more sustainable funding model. notwithstanding that it comes with some headaches, so you're in sectional title and body corporates and mixed residential with hotel. So there's no question there's downsides.
Yeah.
But at least it's really a well-funded model. And the way we use it is that allows us the spare funding capacity to then buy the ones that we can just buy outright, own outright, we have the funding to do that. So we have a mix in our portfolio of what we lease and what we own.
And we're very happy selling them to you day in and day out.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you selling them.
Good. Paul, something you wanted to show us?
Yes, the technology as ever is thwarting me and is threatening that if I decide to make the change, it will throw me off of the event. So what I've simply done is I've just sent up on the chat link just a web link which you can take a look at, and you will see the. So hopefully you can see that on the the chat. And from the perspective of what we do, I think the point is our investors, and we've got a broad church of investors. We have a very small amount of financial sponsor. Predominantly, we are funded ourselves and through a couple of highly supportive family offices in terms of where we've brought the capital in from so far. I think that will change over time as we do need to scale out further capital for further acquisitions as we move forward. What we have seen though, just picking up on this repurposing, is we haven't actually seen a repurposing, but we've seen people using our properties differently. Historically, we're as you say, we're a design-led boutique business and local middle-class F&B driven hotels. They're lifestyle opportunities. We do have an element of long stay, which typically resonates into the NGO and DFI category, where we do see quite considerable traffic over time, where the long stay element, people don't want to feel as if day in day out they're going back to a hotel room. They want to feel as if they're more in a long stay environment. But I think what's been interesting during COVID, as we came out of COVID, is the strength of the domestic demand that we've seen for our properties, and especially in Kampala, where we compete with Nesteel, Speak, Sheraton, Serena, all of the usuals. Whilst Entebbe Airport was closed and essentially Uganda was closed, we were seeing very, very strong staycation demand. And this was from the local middle classes. And the whole staycation market was an area that we'd never really focused on pre-COVID, and it almost fell into our lap. And it gave us, frankly, an element of surprise when we saw the strength. So we rolled this out into Lusaka and Lilongwe as well, and were pleasantly surprised at the uptake in demand simply by repositioning and profiling into a new space, and people going, oh yeah, well, we hadn't really thought about this before. But I think that's similar to the old adage that you don't actually know what you want until someone tells you that you want it. And we saw that with an element with our co-working space, which, as I said, separately is branded as The Works. And when we started, which was a few years ago, we didn't really know if it was actually going to culturally take on, that people would be interested in Sub-Saharan in co-working space. So we're not talking the Regis style boxes, but the more collaborative, more Western European co-working space concept. And for a time, we had an element of tumbleweed rolling through as these were empty, and we're sitting there going, have we made a completely daft call here, and what are we going to do with this space? But it did seem to gain an element of momentum, and as Mark said, there does now seem to be an acceptance that this is an element of the new normal, and people are far more open and flexible, I think, to embracing this now. And we're now seeing, fortunately, as he touches large pieces of wood, very strong occupancy in all of our co-working space, which is something that we're looking at extending further again.
Absolutely. And Mark, I think it's come as no surprise to anyone listening that hotels have been incredibly difficult space in the last year for obvious reasons. But I guess you, like many, have sort of found pockets of resilience and almost areas that have surprised. Do you care to kind of share a couple of those? I mean, what has kind of surprised you over last year from a demand point of view?
This domestic leisure travel, which you highlighted earlier, was a trend that I think it surprised the hotel market internationally.
Yeah.
COVID's tracked kind of 2 months ahead in the northern hemisphere to what I think we're seeing here in Africa. And so we've just been able to watch and see how it has transpired there, and we're seeing the same trends here, just kind of a couple of months later. And that is the emergence of domestic leisure travel, where people cannot travel internationally, and people have been locked up in their homes, raring to get out. And as long as it's a driving distance, they're happy to do it. So we have a hotel called the Capital Pearls in Umhlanga on the KZN coast, which has never done better. Right now, absolutely full high occupancies, back to pretty full rates. And it's even better because what people are realizing is I can go on holiday even more often than I used to, because I'll be in the office maybe for 2 days a week. And then I'm going to actually spend some good quality time with my family, based out of a hotel apartment now with a sea view or with a different setting, just a change of place. But I'm going to still do my Zoom meetings. I'm going to still be in touch with the office, but I'm going to have a work-life balance now. And so I think it's even stronger going forward. In contrast to that, our business hotels in the heart of Sandton, South Africa, continue to be incredibly hard hit, because it just doesn't have the same necessity for people to go there. But what we did do is we started creating a leisure audience through a campaign we called Live It Up, Turn It Up, where we said, as you come out of your COVID lockdown, come in and live inside of our hotels. We have pool parties and just a sense of a break from that same reality on your doorstep. And the rates we're in a price war in these markets, and so the rates have come down, but the advantages with the lower rates, you're actually getting an audience that is far greater, that is using it as an opportunity for some people the first time in their life to stay in a 5-star hotel or a 4-star hotel at a great rate and have a fantastic time, even though it's in a city center. So there we've been surprised again by, we've actually been quite busy with that, but that's still quite low rates.
Yeah, no, sure. Absolutely. And maybe sort of a temporary windfall, but not necessarily something that you need longer term. But I think that's an important point. No longer does a holiday end because you've run out of leave days. It can continue, and people are going to be more working remotely. And I think even incorporating that into a leisure space and a leisure offering is pretty critical. Paul, if I maybe take the switch to you, having almost selected more urban centers in Africa, which have traditionally not been very strong from a leisure point of view, how do you also see that changing, sort of, but not so much even from a domestic perspective of people coming and using the dining, but more your interregional travel and the rise of the sort of regional traveler in Africa from a leisure point of view?
Look, it's a great question. It's one we have grappled with over the years, and we still do. We're always, like Mark, trying to look over the horizon to see what's going to be needed, rather than what's needed today, because there is always a lead time in terms of acquisition of new sites, and potentially acquiring sites and repurposing them, and ensuring that the forward-looking shape of them is going to be where we are. We are urban, and it's deliberately urban, but we're never in the CBD. We're always in the leafy embassy district, and I recall a number of people thought we were quite stark staring mad looking at building on McKinley Hill in Kampala rather than down in the CBD. But what I had more than one doubt on the way as well. But what we've seen has been two trends. One is that the Kampala site, sitting on the hill looking at Lake Vic and the CBD, is being used as almost a destination resort within an urban environment. So people are happy to come up the hill. They don't come up the hill for a drink. They come up the hill for a drink. They have dinner. Sometimes they use the spa as well. And we end up with a large number of P&L touch points, rather than people just jumping into a regular CBD bar or similar. So that's been one interesting development. And we've seen a number of Kampala residents using this as a staycation. Weekends were typically full in Kampala, even now, which is good, because people want to, as Mark said, they want to have a different experience, even though they could still be in their same city, and they will use it as a leisure environment. Whereas historically we've been more corporate, as you said, Wayne. I think the other point is we've always had a pretty decent regional corporate and business traveller market, but albeit around the Sub-Saharan African business. Obviously, that we've seen with COVID and the fact that most of the flights are now messed up, albeit at very short notice. What we've seen is two trends. One is a lot more demand for people to have, let's call them cluster conferencing, whereby instead of us having 30 execs all flying in from 4 different countries, we will now find that we will have 6 or 7 in 3 of our different hotels, and they all want to micro cluster, and then we end up doing 3 smaller events and linking them electronically to save the problem of the travel. So again, it's slightly different, and that means we have to be more catering towards the hosting of the event, rather than necessarily having 30 of them for a dinner and cocktails and in their rooms overnight. So that it's almost the domestic looking outwards into hub and spoke regional demand. So that's been an interesting one that we've been looking at to make sure that we're still relevant for that type of demand. I think the only other thing we've seen, which has been quite interesting, has been the huge truncation in terms of our forward-looking booking visibility. And this has been us and the rest of the industry alike. We're very fortunate that we have an extraordinarily small tourist footprint. We are 6-7%, where we deal with ground handlers, DMCs, and similar. And the vast majority of our business is the local middle classes and the corporates. But what we've seen with the corporates is where we would have 3, 4, 5, 6 week booking visibility comfortably. That's down to 10 days, and if we're lucky on that basis. Now it's a double-edged sword, but the problem is that whilst the airlines and the governments keep flip-flopping in terms of the rules and the regulations, and the flights keep on getting cancelled or rerouted at extraordinarily short notice, 2 things happen. One is we lose that booking visibility, but secondly, people put it into the too hard category at the moment to actually try and book. and they say, well, you know what, I'm not sure if X is actually going to be flying that week. We'll do it as a regional conference, hence back to the hub and spoke concept that we've been seeing. And I can say this from bitter experience that I'm currently in London. I'm trying to get to Lilongwe and Kampala next week, and it's like pulling teeth in terms of how I need to get there and how I have to meet all the various regs and requirements. So I can sympathise and empathise with all the local regional travellers and say, well, I understand why you're changing your protocols and how you're actually conducting business on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just a comment also from my side, as an observation of what we've seen is that, yeah, absolutely, COVID has made a massive, been very challenging. But, a lot of hotel operators and owners have really gone back to basics around how almost a zero-based budget and building up as to what's required. And we've seen hotels able to operate a lot more efficiently and a lot more selectively around what services are provided, etc., which is ultimately a positive from let's say an investor perspective and attracting new capital into the sector. I mean, Mark, maybe to start with you, have you seen this, and do you see the operating model changing a lot post-COVID and carrying through some efficiencies that it's brought?
Yeah, I think the biggest item there, if you think about a property, if you take a owner-operator approach, or you merge the operation with the owner, you've got a property that's probably got debt on it or needs to return a cost of capital, and that can't change. And that's one of the biggest costs, which is property cost. Beyond that, the biggest item is staffing.
Yeah.
And staffing has, through the layoffs, the rehiring, almost every hotel group, unfortunately, in South Africa at least, has run a Section 189 reorganization process. And that's resulted in staff going from a fixed cost to more of a variable cost, at least for our business. And we try to limit it as much as possible. But we now have waiters, as an example, who are scheduled in accordance with the demand from our clients. And it's a cost base that, you used to have people standing around doing nothing on a quiet day, and then you'd have to bring in excess help through these consulting type providers for a busy conference. And it created an overhead cost that I think every hotel group today has now reorganized and gotten that in line. And by the way, we've got our staff working on their full shifts like they were, because the demand is there. But unfortunately, if we go into third wave, then our staff won't be fully working, which is obviously something we hope doesn't happen. And I think that approach, and almost, as you said, zero-based budgeting that's happening through the hotel sector, is going to take out quite a significant layer of cost, but it still doesn't compare to the cost of the property. That is still the biggest single item in the budget.
Absolutely, and I think it's you can look at it as well that's not necessarily great for jobs in the sector across Africa, but almost not the case, because ultimately we need to attract capital and investment to build new hotels that employ more people. If those fundamentals are not there, it's all very well, but you're not going to be kind of creating jobs into the future. So I think we all kind of understand and get that. Paul, a question from Fabio that you wanted to take?
Yeah, and just before that, just picking up the staffing issue again. We agonise. We're a small group. We've got just under 400 staff, of which 99.5% are all local staff. And we look very closely into the communities in which we operate, and we publish an annual CSR report where we try and determine actual measurable KPIs in terms of the impacts that we're having, both social, economic, and in the communities as well as environmental. And we try and benchmark these on an annual basis to see if we are actually doing any better or any worse, and give us pointers as to where we're going forward. One of the interesting facts is that the average number of dependents that we have for each of our employees is about 4.8. So we've got the thick end of 2,000 dependents in terms of where we stand as a group. So we took the somewhat, I think, unusual but expensive decision when we got locked down in the various countries to keep all of our staff employed and paid. And it was an expensive exercise for us. Clearly there was no furlough and there was no governmental support for these, and we felt that this was the right thing to do, and it cost us a ton of money. But we spoke to our shareholders and we explained to them what we were doing and why we were doing it in terms of from a CSR perspective, and we got pretty broad and deep agreement with our methodology. And we didn't do it because we thought that the communities would thank us, or that corporates would come along and shower us with dollars like confetti afterwards. We genuinely thought that this was the right thing to do. We did it, and hopefully it will pay off as a long-term investment in terms of where we stand in terms of the local communities, and where we stand in terms of staff loyalty and retention. Because again, certainly in some of the smaller markets where there aren't hospitality academies or colleges or whatever, it's important that we need to train up the staff in the way that we want to, and once we've trained them up, we want to retain them, and therefore staff retention for us is a very important factor. Clearly, if we're in some of the larger markets, obviously Kampala's comparatively large compared to somewhere such as Lilongwe, for example. We have a deeper talent pool that's available to us. But again, it's all down to the quality of the offering. The buildings, as Mark said, are expensive, and they are the principal cost that we've got to worry about. And if you take a look at our website, you'll see that our hotels are slightly different, a little bit wacky, but they are expensive to look after and keep running because of their look and feel. But ultimately, if you haven't got the staff and the right service standards and delivery, you've got a very, very pretty looking building that's got substandard service, and people walk away with a bad taste in their mouth. So it's really important to find the balance between those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the trends we're seeing around ESG investments is going to follow, and we should kind of see the benefit as a sector, down the line. And it is respected as a very, let's say, employment orientated segment and pro investment. Paul, did you want to touch on Fabio's point? I think
Fabio, thanks. Your question was saying, where was it? With owner-operators being more capital-intensive, and as seen with international hotel management companies taking a more asset-light strategy, is this making the barriers to entry higher for new owner-operators, or is there still enough opportunity in SSA for current post-COVID world? Mark, do you want to kick off with any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, my feeling is that there's only a handful of owner operators. Within that, the owner operators are under pressure. If they couldn't get through COVID, they're under more pressure Then obviously the management companies who don't own the hotels and didn't have as much to lose, maybe they lost fee income. So there's call it two pockets. There's owner operators who the barrier to entry of new hotels have never been higher because the existing portfolio is underwater. And then there's a few owner operators who are well positioned to be chasing assets when there's very little competition for those assets. And, then you've got management companies who are knocking on investors' doors to say to investors, come and bid for these assets and we'll manage it for you. And I think there it's just, it's that two-step remove approach. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of investors saying, well, it didn't work out so well for me when you were managing my existing assets through COVID. So the barriers to entry, where that currently leaves us, is that the barrier to entry, I think, is very low for anyone who has access to capital and anyone who has access to or has an interest in taking a bit more of a longer term view with a short term risk approach. But in the long term, the barriers to entry have never been lower.
Yeah, I'd sort of second that in terms of a lot of the appetite we've seen for platforms across Sub-Saharan Africa, because, to enter the market with one, let's say, 250 key upper upscale hotel in a core gateway city, the opportunities are sort of finite. Whereas really the rise of domestic and regional travel has fueled more the mid-scale space. And I think there are opportunities for platform rollouts, and while one property is not going to attract too much attention from institutional investors, a portfolio rollout is, and I do think that has good fundamentals if you find the right sort of nodes and the right linkages between properties, and there's still certainly a lot of dry powder that can get into the space. The other benefit, of course, is that ultimately from an exit point of view, you've got two options around the propco and the properties, and then the operating company itself. So I think we certainly see it in our business around liquidity for vacant possession properties, where an incoming owner can be more flexible and adaptive of what they do. The same stands for those owner operators ultimately when it comes time to exit. Philippe up in Nairobi, how are you? Good. See, there's a question to Paul just around, I guess, casual employees and what that means from a quality and oversight and control point of view.
Yeah, and I'm just reading Philippe's question at the moment, and yeah, we try and avoid the casual side of it. That we look to engage on what I call a holistic basis with the local communities, and if that involves us, certainly in one of our properties, that we are the largest employee in one of the local villages, for example, and we support the community there and have worked with and invested in the nursery and the primary school, whatever, and it builds a genuine community. That can be a double-edged sword, but it does give us an element of staff loyalty and a reciprocal loyalty of us back into the local community. So I think we have an element of mutual respect on that basis. I think the other point, though, just picking up on the management contract and as Mark said, the one-step remove. Look, if anyone's going to screw up our properties, we're perfectly capable of doing that ourselves. We don't need to have a contractual third party coming in. And from our perspective, I think it's back to Mark's earlier point about the agility. And if you do have the more asset-light model, which is a lot more for the larger brands who are more about GDS and distribution and platforms, rather than the underlying properties themselves as the owner-operator, for us, splitting the ownership and the operation is not what we're about. We are like Mark, we are trying to break the mold. And if you want to call us disruptors or disruptive or just a plain nuisance, I don't know. But certainly from our perspective, we see very much the focusing on this type of core workstay play in a boutique, urban but out of CB environment, as certainly what we want to see going forward. And the barriers to entry, which I think was the point that was being raised, are pretty low for us in terms of moving into a new territory. Just a question of finding, ideally, the right type of fabric of building in the right location that we can tear out and turn into our mildly quirky latitude look and feel. And if we can't, well, we then have to build and develop, which is a bore, because we have development risk, we have IRR drag, and we have all of the other elements. So really, that's the only barrier to entry. It's finding the right location and the right fabric for us to move into that territory. But beyond that, because we don't have this contractual arm's length of having to negotiate with anyone, it's me looking across the table at my co-principals. We agree what we're going to do amongst ourselves, and we can do it. So I think that gives us an element of slightly quicker to market than potentially some other parties.
Great, and I appreciate that we are out of time, but this is the last session, so I'm sure it's not too serious if we go a bit over. But Mark, just some thoughts from your side, around where next, and what I guess, if you were, let's say, president of the country, what would be the three things you'd be looking at from a recovery for the hospitality sector right now?
Well, I think we've all got to look over the horizon, and we've got to say that if we're planning any project, this is a property forum, it's irrelevant what happens in the next 6 months. In the grand scheme of things. In the next 6 months, I think there's going to be broad vaccination. If it takes even 9 months or a year, still in the grand scheme, that's not what's important. What are going to be the trends after that? What we've got to look to. We're heavy in the conference space, and we had a lot of people tell us, oh my gosh, conferencing, post-COVID, who's going to conference? Everything's virtual today. And we know that actually, we think our conference is going to absolutely boom post that when everyone's vaccinated and can sit in a room together, bearing in mind they wouldn't have seen each other in the office for so long, bearing in mind that they would need to reestablish their cultures because they don't see as much of each other, that they want to party, workplace, stay together, so they want to do an incentive trip of 2 or 3 days together, meeting, conferencing, and then go and break away and go back to their hybrid home office and back into the office. So I think the conferencing opportunities over the horizon are going to be fantastic. But where would you want to conference? If you had that choice now, well, do you want to conference in the middle of a city center? It's not as good. I'd rather be, as Paul describes, on the hill with the view in that kind of setup. So I think we have an opportunity now to look over the horizon, look at what those new trends are, and repurpose properties to meet that new world. And I think there's a hell of a lot of opportunity. And at the same time, I think looking over the horizon at some of these business hotels and CBDs, I think a lot of it's going to need to be repurposed to residential, because we're in a position where our biggest issue now is that we're oversupplied in the city center, where I think fundamentally there will not be the same level of demand going forward. If you're in the center of New York City, and there's just so many hotels in New York City, and it's just not going to be that same amount of work trips to New York, because people are going to say, I'm still going to go to New York. No one's going to stop going to New York, but they'll probably go half the number of trips that they were before. And so I think there's going to need to be a repurposing, because if there isn't, then this price war that we're in now, where there's an oversupply of stock, will just perpetuate and perpetuate and perpetuate. And that's probably, if I was the president of any country right now and trying to help the hospitality sector, I would try and find a way that that as things normalize, stop the price war. The price war is our occupancy is already down, but we're coping. But occupancy down and rate down is too tough a challenge.
Great. Well, thank you very much. You've heard it from two investment bankers come hoteliers. I think that's what it's all about, is that disruption, both from a capital point of view, both from a product point of view, and the guest experience. I think Mark couldn't have summed it up better, that the next 6 months are going to be tough, but that's not really what's going to shape the rest of what hospitality is going to look like coming out of this. And that's really what we've got to focus on, in making that guest experience so much better and on the other side of this. So thanks everyone for joining. Unless there's any other questions, Kafir, I think we can close up on this session.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Wayne.
Good.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Mark and Paul. Great session. Really provided a deep level insight into what's going on, and the way forward. And I think there's a lot of interesting thoughts that came out of the session, and really looking ahead. As Mark, I think you also alluded to, I think the next 6-12 months, they're going to be what they are. I think the key is what happens afterward. So thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mark. And to our audience, thank you for joining in today. I hope you got some great insights from all the sessions, and really begins a great cycle of products and events that we have lined up for this year. And we look forward to connecting with you in end of May, June, and as we move ahead. So thank you, everyone, and thanks to the panel.
Thank you.